Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fantasy Football Endgame. To our loyal viewers, thanks for joining us again. We're going to talk about our favorite draft day steals today. First, before we get into the meat of the video, don't forget to check the links in the description below. We are still mock drafting 3 times a week. That's right, we're constantly doing this to help you prepare for the season. Join in, there's usually some spots available, so check those links below. And also join our Discord server, talk football all week long, every week. So check those out in the description. But first, let's get to our steals. Now, these are some players that we think are absolute bargains at their current ADP. So let's get into it. Chris, who's a player you think is a steal in most drafts?
Well, I've talked about this guy a lot. I feel like I've talked about him in every video, but I'm going to keep talking about him because he's becoming more of a steal as we get closer to the season, and that's Jalen Hurts. And I don't understand it. Yeah, there was a little bit of stretch there where, you know, there were some rumors that maybe they were going to trade for Deshaun Watson, but it sounds like Deshaun Watson isn't going to be traded to any team anytime soon. You know, even without the legal stuff, it sounds like the Texans are not ready to give up hope on Deshaun Watson yet. So by all accounts, Jalen Hurts is the starter in Philadelphia. He's taken every first team snap in training camp, every single one. And look, he didn't light it up in the first preseason game, but he looked more than good enough. And I've talked about it over and over. He gives you that league-winning rushing upside. I know there's question marks with his throwing, but guess what? There's question marks with Lamar Jackson's throwing, and it doesn't matter because look what he does on the ground. I'm not saying Jalen Hurts is going to be as good as Lamar Jackson on the ground, but I think him, Kyler Murray, and Lamar Jackson are the only guys who have 800 to 1,000-yard rushing upside. And when we talk about league-winning quarterbacks, most of them are drafted outside the top 100 quarterbacks. And guess what? Jalen Hurts has now fallen outside the top 100. Sorry, I said the top 100 quarterbacks. I meant the top 100 picks. Jalen Hurts has now fallen outside the top 100 picks. So he checks every box that a traditional league-winning quarterback checks. Rushing upside, outside the top 100 picks. I get there's risk, but guess what? Every time you make a pick in fantasy football, there is risk. But you gotta weigh the risk to the reward, and here the reward way outweighs the risk. So to me, Jalen Hurts, absolute steal in drafts right now.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Every year we see a quarterback, and the last 3 years in a row, it's been somebody who was drafted in the middle, sometimes even later rounds of the draft, and emerged to be the best quarterback in all of fantasy. Second-year player, Mahomes, the second-year player, Lamar Jackson, now Jalen Hurts. I'm going to go with a guy similar profile, maybe not quite as high rushing upside, but somebody who is a dual threat, happens to be the number 1 pick in the draft. It's kind of hard to believe more people aren't talking about Trevor Lawrence. This was supposed to be a guy who was a generational talent, the obvious number 1 pick in the NFL draft, and people are just like, maybe I'll take a chance on him in fantasy. Like, am I missing something? What is the deal? I mean, he's set up for success in so many ways. They added Marvin Jones in free agency. They added Travis Etienne, who's a pass-catching running back. And, oh, by the way, his teammate at Clemson. We have an offensive-minded head coach. So this is Trevor Lawrence's team. He's going to have enough weapons at his disposal. This is a guy, again, who's supposed to be a generational talent, does have that rushing ability. He's not going to rush for 800 yards, but 400 to 500 is definitely in the cards. And very accurate thrower. Why can't he finish as a top 10 quarterback? Give me the reasons, right? Playing in a division also where he does get to face defenses like the Texans twice a year. The Jaguars not slated to have one of the toughest schedules in the NFL. So again, just not sure why he's being dismissed. You talk about going outside the top 100. Trevor Lawrence is being drafted later than Jalen Hurts. So despite all the questions circling Hurts, there's really no questions with Lawrence, and yet people don't seem too enthused about him. So absolute steal for sure. If you're waiting on quarterback, which I tend to do in drafts, Lawrence is a guy I'm taking very often. All right, let's keep going. Who's another guy you think is an absolute steal?
Yeah, I'm going to a wide receiver. Another one I've talked about a lot. I'm going to keep talking about him, and that's Curtis Samuel of my football team. Look, I've mentioned it in another video, but just in case you didn't see that, he only played 62% of the snaps with Carolina last year. He was their clear number 3 option, and he still had a very good fantasy season. He was actually the most efficient fantasy player when it came to fantasy points per snap. Now he's coming into the football team. He was brought here for a reason. He does something they don't have. They didn't have his kind of skill set last year. He's going to be on the field 80, 90%, maybe even more of the snaps. He might be an every down player. And with his efficiency, that's just going to help his upside even more. And oh, by the way, he's now going from, dump off low ADOT Teddy Bridgewater to gunslinging Ryan Fitzpatrick, who just happens to make every wide receiver he plays with fantasy gold. So there's no reason to think Curtis Samuel can't finish as a top 24 wide receiver this season. In fact, I think he will finish as a top 24 wide receiver, but this is a guy who's going after pick 75, pick 80, pick 90 a lot of times in drafts. Absolute draft steal, absolute bargain. Get him when you can.
Definitely agree with that pick. It's funny how people tend to sometimes ignore the numbers, right? The statistics and what happened last year, and they focus on the narratives, right? So I'm going to go with a guy that I think is being undervalued, even though it seems like he's getting a lot of hype, but the ADP says differently. Javonte Williams in Denver. So I get that Melvin Gordon is still there, right? There's going to be maybe a two-headed monster at running back, but Melvin Gordon already banged up with a groin injury in the preseason. We know those can be tough to recover from quickly. Javonte Williams looking sharp so far. Not a lot of action in the preseason, of course, but looked pretty good in his first game of the preseason. And this is obviously a guy they drafted for a reason. Been talking about him throughout the preseason. The plan is, of course, by the second half of the season, he becomes the replacement for Gordon long term. This is a guy you should want on your team because he'll produce when it matters most, which is the end of the season in the fantasy playoffs. Now, a lot of people tend to overreact to what happened last year. And last year, a lot of people were bitten by the rookie running back class because they were drafted way too high. They got too much hype and they didn't pay off, right? Especially you overstepped boundaries to get Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the first round. He absolutely was not worth it. DeAndre Swift didn't really pay off. Jonathan Taylor eventually did, but it took us, 10, 11 weeks to get there, to get anywhere. So I feel like now we're going the other way. These rookie running backs are being undervalued. Najee Harris, I've talked about all offseason. I think he's actually going to be a league winner, and Javonte Williams could be close. I'm not saying he's going to be Najee Harris, but this is a guy you definitely want. And the fact that he's going outside the top 25 running backs in some leagues is just insane to me. So absolute steal for me based on his upside. All right, let's close out with one more each. Chris, give me another draft day steal.
I've got another wide receiver for you. It's boring Corey Davis of the now New York Jets. And here's the thing. Love Elijah Moore. Think Elijah Moore is going to have a great season. And if you check out our breakout wide receivers, I talk about Elijah Moore in there. But I also talk about the fact that Corey Davis is the Jets' number one wide receiver. And he will be the Jets' number one wide receiver. And if you didn't think he was going to be the number one wide receiver, all you had to do was look at the first preseason game when he ran 4 routes. Zach Wilson attempted 4 passes, and all of them went to Corey Davis. Every single one went to Corey Davis. Now, I get it. Elijah Moore wasn't out there, but that doesn't matter. That shows that Zach Wilson and Corey Davis have a connection. Literally every single throw, the first 4 throws Zach Wilson made all went to Corey Davis, and then Corey Davis left the game. But so every chance he could, he threw to Corey Davis. Corey Davis is going to lead this team in targets. He may not put up monster yardage. He may not score a ton of touchdowns, but it doesn't matter. You're not drafting him to be, a top 10, a top 5 wide receiver. This is another guy I think can crack, maybe not quite top 24, but I think he can definitely crack top 36, maybe even top 30. And he's also going outside the top 100 players. He's going even later than Curtis Samuel. So another guy I think you should be targeting late in your drafts at the wide receiver position, who people just seem to pass on because they think he's boring and doesn't do anything. But he's going to get a lot of targets this year, and he's going to have a lot of value.
So I see your boring veteran wide receiver, and I'll raise you a Sterling Shepard, who is definitely not getting a lot of love because, the Giants did what you don't want to see for wide receivers. Add more wide receivers, right? They drafted Kadarius Toney early, probably a little too early, and Kenny Golladay, one of the biggest free agents to move teams at the wide receiver position. So why would we care about the receiver who's already been there for a couple of years and hasn't really been a fantasy stud? Well, Kenny Golladay is hurt again. Kadarius Toney really hasn't done much to speak of. I honestly wasn't super high on him anyways. Now, I'm not saying those guys will be complete non-factors, but it's not as if they're going to get 100% of the target share all of a sudden. All right, Sterling Shepard, the fact that he is the old boring veteran standby that has been there, that's actually going to work in his favor. He'll have at least a little bit of rapport and chemistry with Daniel Jones. He's a guy who should work primarily out of the slot, which means probably more targets going his way. So even if Golladay and Toney are healthy and get going, Shepard could still be productive. And I really think that people are completely dismissing him. Here's a guy who's not going to get drafted in a lot of 12-team leagues at all. In a full PPR setting, he absolutely can provide value. I'm not saying the upside is huge. I'm not going to say that, he's going to have 1,000 yards a season or double-digit touchdowns. But you know what? As your 4th, 5th receiver, he doesn't need to pay off. He's going to give you some positive return on your investment, which is basically a last-round pick. So don't forget about Shepard. He's a guy who actually could be that team's leading receiver when it's all said and done, for whatever that's worth. All right, guys, this is our draft day steals. Check out our other videos, of course. Hit that subscribe button. This is the Fantasy Endgame, brought to you by Bear Clothing, proud sponsor. Wear your worth. All right, thanks for watching.